one of the big things to do at the end of any century or any decade is to name the most important people of the decade, or if it's a century, of the century. And there's little doubt that one of the most important, if not the most important person of the 20th century was Adolf Hitler. And not because of anything good that he did. But he sets in motion events that dominated the 20th century, the later half of the 20th century, and going into the 21st century. Not counting the Cold War, which he contributed to, Hitler dominates our historical imagination. How could he possibly have done what he had done? To begin with, Hitler is not even German. He's actually born in Austria in times of the Habsburg monarchy in 1889. His father is an Austrian civil servant and dies when he's young. He wants to be an artist. In his teenage years, when he goes to Vienna to compete for a place in the Academy of Art, he goes, and the admissions committee unfortunately rejects him, mainly because of the fact that he could not paint people. But they recommended that he go and apply for the architecture school because his pictures of buildings were actually pretty good. But he could not apply for that school because he did not have a high school diploma, and you needed one to get into the school. So he makes his living in Vienna, doing odd jobs, painting postcards. But those days were far more important for him in Vienna before World War I, because there is where he picks up his anti-Semitism. Before World War I, Vienna is the hotbed for social Darwinism and a lot of other things, and it's it's a place where the first modern politicians will actually run on the platform of anti-Semitism. So, and there Hitler absorbs it all. In 1913, he leaves Vienna for Germany, and he will be in Munich when World War I is declared. He enlists in the German army and serves on the Western Front with considerable distinction. He is deeply saddened by the loss, but he's also exhilarated by the experience of war. He was one of those guys who had little sense of purpose before the war, and he loved what war offered: adventure, danger, and comradeship that it created between him and his fellow soldiers. After the war, he's a spy for the Bavarian police on various political groups. His job is to infiltrate small radical parties in Munich and report back to police headquarters. One of them he infiltrates, and he will eventually become its leader, known as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, known short by its first two syllables of their first word, the Nazis. As you can undoubtedly know, the party grew under Hitler's leadership. His message was one of extreme nationalism. The German people were the best on the earth. They had been betrayed by the traitors of World War I, particularly the Jews, and they would again become great. As mentioned before, his model is Mussolini, and in 1923 he tries to institute his own march by having a march on Munich, or the beer hall Putsch. It's a disastrous failure, and Hitler is arrested and sentenced to jail. While in jail, Hitler will write, or rather dictate, his book known as Mein Kampf. And when you read it, one has to admit that it is one of the most influential books of the 20th century, mainly because of the fact that what Hitler said in this book, he actually did. So what's in it? First of all, to understand Hitler, you must appreciate he's a racist in every sense of the word. He completely believed in social Darwinism. He believed the races of the world were in a hierarchy from fit to unfit. And he had no doubt that the Germanic races were on top. At the bottom were the Jews and the Gypsies. And then these people were not just at the bottom. They were dangerous to the great races. And since they were dangerous, they had to be exterminated. But he's also a thoroughgoing romantic. He believed that the greatest era for Germany had been under Charlemagne in the Middle Ages. He also believed that there was a mystical bond between the farmers and the soil. He combined romantic ideas with social Darwinism, arguing that biologically the best people were farmers. He believed that there's an even stronger sacred bond between the blood of Aryan farmers and the soil. He argued that the German nation faced two serious problems. It's being squeezed into far too small of space of Europe, and that in that small space, he was becoming increasingly urbanized and being corrupted by that urbanization. To preserve the strength of the German bloodline, Germany needed to expand. Germany needed to go get new farming land, where biologically superior German people could go and make their way and establish that bond between blood and soil. But where are you going to find it? Hitler declared that it was going to be found in Europe, no colonies, and it would have to be taken from the best farmland in Europe. That, of course, will be the Ukraine, in the southern part of the Soviet Union. But you might ask yourself, that farmland belongs to the Soviet Union, and is occupied by the Ukrainians. Hitler declared that it would have to be conquered, and the people there would just have to be exterminated. Without the Depression, Hitler would probably have remained a marginal power on the political scene of Germany. But there is the Depression, and he had a message that many Germans found appealing. He promised jobs, blamed the problems of the Germans on the Treaty of Versailles, the Communists, and the Jews. There were a number of elections in the 1930s, and the Nazis would never won a flat-out majority in any of these elections. But in January of 1933, a few conservative leaders asked Hitler if they would lead them in a coalition of parties. He did, and he quickly pulled off parliamentary maneuvers that gave him full power in Germany. Unlike Mussolini, Hitler had a program. First, he would put Germans back to work. Did so with public works of enormous sizes and all kinds, especially rearmament, specifically prohibited by the Treaty of Versailles. Then he took a sinister turn. His government established concentration camps, where he would put enemies of the state, where communists, socialists, and anyone who opposed him would go. In 1935, he issued the Nuremberg Laws that deprived Jews of German citizenship. He then encouraged party toughs to beat up Jews in the streets, harass Jewish merchants, and all of which would come to a head in 1938 with Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, and the destruction of synagogues in Germany. But perhaps the most portentous event of the time occurred in November of 1937, when he called together senior commanders of the German army and announced that the time was rapidly approaching to put his plans into effect. He declared it would begin with the conquest of Eastern Europe, but it would not be done once and for all, but rather carefully and methodically. He did not want to drive the Western European powers into war. And by the way, talking about Western European powers, we're talking about Britain and France. And when that dream was completed, he would set forth an achievement of his ultimate dream, the conquest of the Soviet Union, and the building of his new Germany in the East. He told his generals that he would begin when the time was right, but it would come no later than 1945. And as we shall see, events mainly of his own making will severely change that timetable for Hitler.